This is episode 112 of Stand Up. Hope you had a great weekend. Joining us for the whole hour is the Legal Eagle, Eric Segall, who sat down with a live group of subscribers to the podcast on Thursday night. Had a whole bunch of questions. Great conversation. A lot of fun hanging out. That's coming up right now on Stand Up. Let's roll, Tim. Hey, hi, hello, and happy Tuesday, the 26th of May. I am Pete Dominic, at Pete Dominic, standupwithpete@gmail.com, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much. Did you hear my voice just crack? I'm keeping it in there. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you had a long weekend. I took Monday off. It was the first time I had a 3-day weekend since, I think, September. And I want to thank all of the listeners, subscribers who insisted that I do just that, because I said on Friday's show I was flirting with the idea of taking a 3-day weekend and taking Monday off. And I got some nice notes from folks saying, please do, the paying subscribers of this podcast saying, please do, you deserve it. And so I did. I actually wasn't going to until last night or Sunday night. I was outside mowing the lawn. I get a phone call, or I get my wife came out, said she got a phone call from my daughter, who was at her friend's for the very first time since we started, relaxing the social distancing rules, and they were skateboarding around her neighborhood. She fell on her arm, and we thought she broke it. I had to take her to the emergency room. Turns out, might be a fracture, but probably not. But it was not a fun 2 hours last night in the ER. But to say the least, I didn't have time to put together the podcast, and I also had to appear on MSNBC last night, so I just didn't have time. So I ended up not having a Monday show, and I'm sure nobody cares. It's totally fine. But for those of you that were expecting it, I apologize to you. And I've got a great list of guests that are joining me this week. Another week. So much to discuss with you, and I want to get it started. We had Eric Segall joining us last week. I'm going to try to do it every week, where I invite a guest, and I invite you to join me. And we all hang out. We ask questions of the guest. We have a good time. I bust chops. You bust mine. It was very fun. We always learn a lot, as we did this time from Eric Segall. We did it the first time with Kenneth C. Davis. And you let me know who you want to join us in a hangout and ask questions, and subscribers only can join and ask questions. But everybody now gets to hear it a few days after it happened. So that is coming up. Also, I'm going to share my appearance on MSNBC with Dean Obeidallah and Joshua Johnson from Sunday night. And I want to play this clip for you from the president, who sat down with Cheryl Atkinson of the Sinclair Broadcasting Group. I think that's a friendly, quote, journalist. And he had this to say, which I think was really disturbing and strange, but yet revealing. I don't normally, obviously, play Trump. I try not to pay too close attention to what he's saying day to day, but I did want to play this for you and say some shit about him.
I'm fighting the deep state. I'm fighting the swamp. And I said I was doing it, and I'm exposing the swamp. I think if it keeps going the way I'm going, and Ratcliffe is fantastic, if it keeps going the way it's going, I have a chance to break the deep state. It's a vicious group of people. It's very bad for our country, and that's never happened before.
Never happened before, one of his favorite things to say. But first of all, there's no deep state. Okay. And when the president is referring to the deep state and the swamp, he is simply referring. What he is saying is, I am getting rid of anybody that is not loyal to me. That's all he cares about, is himself, his image, his reelection. That's it. And so when he's talking about the swamp, when he's talking about the deep state, he is talking about people that are not sufficiently loyal to him. That's it. That's all you need to know about that, except for one other point, which is, I saw Walter Schaub make this, smart guy, on Twitter. He says, people are understandably chuckling about these comments, but Trump is quite serious. Career federal employees know what he means. He is threatening a purge of the career ranks of the civil service. It's not the first time this messaging has come out of the White House. If you know anybody in the federal government, you know that they are terrified of the president and pissing him off because they're going to get fired. And by the way, he just sent a whole bunch of National Guard troops home one day before they would have gotten their federal benefits. They're supposed to do they get them at 99 days and they cut them off at 98 days. I want to talk with somebody about that coming up this week, I hope. But he's just such a monster and a piece of shit. But I just wanted to clear that up. When he's talking about the deep state and the swamp, he is only talking about people, this is the third time I'm saying this, I'm sorry, that aren't sufficiently loyal to him. It's not about cronyism or corruption or anything like that most of us think the swamp is. It's simply if anybody pisses him off. And that guy, John Radcliffe, is his new DNI. That guy is a partisan hack, has no right being in that job, and has trafficked in conspiracy theories. And it's pretty scary that he's now in charge. Well, the close circle of people, though, are all loyalists. That's the way it's turned out to be for this president in hopefully his final half year or 150 some days left before hopefully he does not get reelected. Okay, so now I want to play for you the special that we did on Thursday night with Eric Segall. A whole bunch of subscribers joined us. I think it was 67 in total. We had a lot of fun, and here is my conversation with the legal eagle, Eric Segall, at eSpin Segall on Twitter, Georgia State University. Get his books. Let's do it. Very excited to have everybody here. Very, very excited to have you all joining me for a special event this evening, a subscriber-only event. There are two people whose names get mentioned the most that are favorite guests on Stand Up with Pete Dominick over the years. They are, of course, Aaron Carroll, Dr. Aaron Carroll, and Professor Eric Segall. Those are the names I hear a lot. And I am very happy that Eric Segall agreed to join me tonight for the hour. He has a piece in today's New York Times about the Federalist Society that he co-authored. He is, of course, a constitutional law professor at Georgia State University. He's the author of Supreme Myths. He's the author of, most recently, Originalism as Faith. He's on Twitter at eSpin Segall. Ladies and gentlemen, Eric Segall, everybody. Get that energy going. It sounds like there's four people. It really, Zoom audio absolutely just ruins everything.
Sorry.
That's okay.
We're here.
Muting everybody. There are 56 people here tonight at this special event. We have broken a record. Eric Segall, you are on the air. Hello, my friend.
Hey, Pete. Hey, everybody. I so appreciate you all coming. And I love seeing the faces of people who I talk to on Twitter. It's just an amazing, almost all of you I talk to on Twitter. And it's just amazing.
Even Jason Moe with the beard, is that a face that you like to look at you young Santa?
Jury is out.
Well, listen, man, thank you very much for joining us. This really is exciting because people have been listening to you on the show for over 10 years. And I thought we would just start with us, with our relationship, because our relationship is awesome in that you were listening to the show one day and I was saying something stupid about something. I was talking about racism and specifically something about former Senator Trent Lott is my recollection. And you were just listening to the show. And of course, you being an expert on constitutional law and having a lot of very, I think, expert opinions about race and racism in America, you called up. You take it from there, pal.
Well, so my professional life is made 1,000 times easier by my wife. And so she's going to tell you the backstory of this. So
okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Eric Segall's wife, much better half. What a mismatch. Lynn Segall, everybody. Lynn. Hi, Lynn.
Hey, everyone. So Eric was listening to Pete's show for a long time, and he would. This is when you were in the afternoon, Pete. You were like on the drive home.
Yeah,
remember those?
Yeah,
days?
POTUS, like 3 to 6 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Eric would come home and he'd say, "I just got to tell you about this radio show. I just love this guy. He lets his guests talk, and they have these really interesting conversations. And he just would rave about your show, Pete. And that year at New Year's Eve, we did an activity where everyone had to say something they wanted to happen in the next year. And Eric's was that he wanted to be a guest on your show. He said, my goal is to be on Pete's show.
What a low bar.
So that was December 31st. And I'm not kidding. The next week, it was the first week of January. Our kids were little. They were still in high chairs. I was in the kitchen feeding them dinner. And Eric comes up to the back door with his phone in his hand. And he goes, I called into that show. I'm on hold. I can hang up if you need help. And I was like, no, go do the call. So he went back to his car and he sat in the driveway And he did that call from the car. And then he came in and I said, how'd it go? And he's like, I think I'm going to get to be a guest. And he was a guest on your show, I think, like 2 days later or something. It was really fast.
Yeah, that Friday. That was like a Monday or a Tuesday. And that Friday, your old producer called me and said, you want to come on? And I said, yes. And we did.
That's
the rest of history. But I do want to, thanks. That was awesome.
Thank you, Lynn.
And now I'm doing yoga twice a week with Pete's wife, Val, and it's awesome.
Really special. I will add that we come back here, Lynn, just real quick, because this is sweet. It's a really interesting thing to get to know, like, a lot of the folks that are here tonight and become friends with them. And certainly most of my friends in my life are people who are guests on the show or listeners of the show at this point. And what's unique, though, about you guys is not only are Eric and I friends. One of my closest friends and mentors, Eric, has been through all of the low times and best times of my life in the last 10 years. But our families have also spent a good amount of time together. And the fact that you're doing yoga with Val, it's very special, this relationship and the way that it started. So I just wanted to say that. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, we feel the same way.
Absolutely.
All right, you guys have fun. I'm going to be over in the peanut gallery. I might pipe in here and there if it gets out of control.
Anytime.
And we just have to comment on
No.
COVID hair.
Oh, wow. Must be nice.
I've never seen Eric's hair.
That is
a little unruly. Right.
Pete had been talking about race for a couple of weeks extremely well. And then all of a sudden, Trent Lott said something really stupid and racist and got in trouble. And Pete, for like 2 days, was just hammering on Trent Lott. And I thought, that's not like him. That was an unusual turn. So I decided to try to call in and tell Pete that I had all these statistics about unemployment for African Americans and how many African Americans were in jail and all this stuff. Talk about that, for Christ's sake. Don't talk about Trent Lott's stupid comment. The guy's a racist pig anyway. And that's how it started.
And I'm looking at the messages. Just a real quick, Joby and everybody else is wondering, is there any way that you, during this Zoom chat, could take the camera out to see your guest house that you have and try to deny that you have?
No.
I see a lot of people laughing and clapping, and it seems overwhelming that people would like to see once and for all this structure in the back that you call a shed and I call an entire house with a kitchen.
How do you feel about rats and termites and falling roofs?
We're all fine with them.
Is okay.
Yeah, we're all fine, except for Francis, who's faced. Karen is shaking her head. Okay, so thank you for joining me. It must be pretty cool, man. And I meant to say this to you off air and personally, but I said, I'll say it on air. It must be pretty cool to have an op-ed published in the New York Times, which is the case today. You co-authored something with Caroline Fredrickson. You could tell me about her, but just how cool is that you're in the New York Times today?
Well, so the interesting thing about the New York Times, there's two interesting things about publishing op-eds in the New York Times.
The money.
One is it's a grueling experience. I've published in the LA Times, the Atlanta, a lot of places. And the New York Times is the most grueling place. They fact check whatever you've heard about the Times. I will tell you from personal experience, they fact check every sentence. They make sure everything is documented, and it takes a long time, and they change their minds. But having said that, once it comes out, the reach is quadruple any place else. It doesn't matter where else. I got 5-6 emails today before 11 a.m. from strangers asking me questions, talking about the piece. Caroline Fredrickson is the former president of the American Constitution Society, which is a group of progressive lawyers, law professors, and law students. We're kind of the junior cousin to the Federalist Society. And she's wonderful, and she'll be at Georgetown next year. And she contacted me and said, and this again comes back to Twitter, Pete. So many things come back to Twitter. She said, I saw your debates on Twitter with these conservative law professors who were denying that the Federalist Society supports judges. And that's a lie. And I said, I know, that's not true. And I've been arguing with them. She said, you want to write an op-ed? And I said, sure. So we did. And it's actually a really important point for our current events, which is your federal judges who will be around when your grandchildren have children, some of them, because some of them are 40 years old. This guy, Justin Walker from Kentucky, who's going to the D.C. Court of Appeals, is 38 years old, making him the youngest person since 1983 to be on that court. And it is not Trump. It is not even Barr. It is none of those people picking the judges. It is, in fact, a group of very conservative, libertarian, religious people in the Federalist Society's leadership that's picking these judges. And that's what the op-ed was about.
I want to get into the op-ed, but I also want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions. You know, this is a unique situation because we've got so many people who have been listening to you for so many years. I'm hoping that we'll have a lot of questions from folks that are joining us here tonight. But I also just think, you know, what was somebody sent earlier to both of us? Was it on Twitter?
Yes.
Just about basically, they asked a great question about how you came to the conclusion that the Supreme Court is not a court, right?
Yeah,
was it an evolution? Was it a moment? That was a really good question.
And it really was actually just a few moments, not a lot of moments. When I first started teaching in 1991, I taught First Amendment, free speech, that kind of thing, and federal jurisdiction. And it wasn't until 3 or 4 years later that I started teaching the core constitutional law courses. And like everything in America, most things in America, I came to this conclusion because of race. I started when I prepared to teach constitutional law, and of course I knew some of this from my background, but when I really got into it, the way the Supreme Court has destroyed the African-American community in this country is one of the great untold stories of our political system. And so I started reading these cases. 1857, Congress wants to abolish slavery in the territories. And the Supreme Court says, no, you can't do that. Then we have the Reconstruction Amendments, which the specific purpose was to protect African Americans. So Congress in the 1870s passes a law prohibiting discrimination and segregation in movie theaters, hotels, restaurants. It was a very good law. The Supreme Court struck it down. Now, I'm not suggesting that segregation wouldn't have happened if that hadn't happened, but if the court had upheld that law in 1875, a lot of our country's history would have been different. And then I get to Brown. Okay, that's good. I like Brown. But then in Brown 2, the court tells the states basically do it slowly. And they did. I mean, the phrase was all deliberate speed.
Desegregation.
Yeah. And then in recent times, we have, of course, the voting rights cases. But here's my point. All of those race cases, combined with a bunch of others, had nothing to do with law. They had nothing to do with law. The court was just expressing its values and preferences. So then I started reading about a group of radical left progressive scholars it was called the Critical Legal Studies Movement. And their position was that almost all of law is politics all the way down. I don't really believe that. But when it comes to the Supreme Court, what I learned is text, history, and prior cases don't matter. Not just true for race, true for free speech, true for religion. And that's why the Constitution changes. That's what the only difference between Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia, who disagreed on everything. There's almost no hard constitutional law issue they agreed on. They were both smart. Ginsburg's much smarter, but they were both smart. They were both prepared. Their values and life experiences made the difference. Let me just close this with this thought. All other federal judges have to, when they make a decision, their job is to follow the Supreme Court. And I have dozens of friends who sit on the lower federal courts. And they take that responsibility, most of them. This is changing now as FedSoc gets more of their judges. But they take their responsibility seriously. And if the Supreme Court tells them to do something, they do it. So that law of the Supreme Court binds them. Nothing binds the Supreme Court. Nothing. Not their prior cases. In theory, a constitutional amendment could. That's never going to happen. So this is, and I'll end with this analogy because I think my dad is here someplace. My dad was a CEO of a pretty big company, but he had a board of directors that he had to deal with, and he didn't have absolute power, and he didn't have absolute power for life. The problem with the Supreme Court is not the people, it's the institution. Because telling any person, no matter how good their character is, you have unreviewable power for life is a terrible idea. And we are the only country in the world that does it. And all of that came to me in about a week. And then I started researching it and studying it. And frankly, Pete, in the 2 years I did your show, while I was writing Supreme Myths and expressing these thoughts, it really helped me. You were a big part of this. You don't know this, but you were. because I was airing these thoughts out loud, and your very smart listeners would push back. I think I had the answers, but that's how it happened.
How old is your dad now? He's joining us?
He's 91. He turned 91 a couple of days ago on Saturday.
Shout out to Maurice Segall, everybody who's hanging out. He's figured out the Zoom. He's got to be proud of his kid, Eric, and all that he's accomplished. He's got an article in the New York Times today, of course. So, all right, I've got a billion questions for you. And I think that it's unique that we have all these people here and we can have a broad, general conversation about the court. And I see a lot of people are already mentioning things in the chat, but I do want to ask you about your piece today in the New York Times that you co-wrote that we started by talking about. It is titled, and everybody should go check it out if you haven't already, Trump judges or Federalist Society judges, try both. The group says it doesn't endorse nominees for public office. Say what? So you make a lot of interesting points here, but you say that the representation made by the Federalist Society on his website is misleading at best and demonstrably false on worst. But why is this such an important issue that you would write an article about the Federalist Society? And aren't there deeper and more long-term and impactful things about this organization that matter than this one point?
No, I don't think so, actually. The Federalist Society has every right to lobby for and try to get their judges on the bench. Now, I don't like their judges, and we can talk about that. But what they shouldn't do is make misleading comments about their participation. And I think they do it for a reason that is seriously important if you care about the federal judiciary. By the way, all 5 conservatives on the Supreme Court have ties to the Federalist Society. 80% of Trump judges have ties to the Federalist Society. The reason this is important is because they have unconscionable amounts of money from people like the Koch brothers before one of them died, and very far right conservative religious organizations. And so what they do is they do a splendid job, and we conceded this, of having debates and conferences and panels. I've spoken on many of them. My school put a picture of me on our magazine in front of a Federalist Society podium.
Not good PR for you.
Which was kind of funny.
Yeah.
But Pete, they get to the first-year law students with meetings and pizza and barbecue, and they start and this organization at the elite law schools, which is where our judges come from. They recruit them at a very early age, and then they provide them networking opportunities to hobnob. So, for example, Randy Barnett, who many of you know of, who's an originalist at Georgetown. He has a 2-week camp at Georgetown in May where he pays students to come, scholarships. They don't have to pay. He pays them to come. And he brings in Gorsuch, and he brings in Kavanaugh, and he brings in famous originalists, and he'll bring in 1 or 2 non-originalists to pretend that it's an academic thing, but it's really much more of a rally. And a friend of his will kill me because we have an on-off friend relationship. But the reality is that the Federalist Society is putting into the federal bench judges who are incredibly conservative, devoted to the Republican Party, anti-affirmative action, anti-choice, anti-gay rights, for a unitary executive, as long as a Republican is president. That'll change if a Democrat becomes president. But here's the kicker, Pete, and here's why the op-ed was so important, and here's why they should be transparent about this. We can vote most politicians out. If we don't like them, we say goodbye. These judges, who are mostly in their 40s, are going to be ruling us for 40 years. Now, they have a right to do that, but they should admit it and be open about it. And on their website, and not only on their website, I added something to the Times that it took out because of word space. But at many conferences, if you go to a Federalist Society conference, before it starts, they'll say, we don't take policy positions, we don't lobby, which is fair on that, and we don't support people for public office. And then all these impressionable first-year law students, and by the way, Judge Walker, who's going to be on the Court of Appeals in D.C., joined the Federalist Society his first year. They all hear this, and they say, oh, it's just an academic organization. It's not. It's a political organization with a serious agenda funded by dark money. And it's a really serious thing.
I think that last point is really important. I was going to ask you about that. Funded by dark money. We don't know who funds this organization, and that is something that everybody should know about every organization.
Right. Well, we know some of the groups, and they're all conservative, libertarian, right-wing groups, but I think the bulk of the money, and so the Times and Caroline and I went back and forth on this because Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has made this a mission for him to get behind the Federalist Society. And he had a quote a few weeks ago that it's funded by dark money groups that we can't identify, and we're trying. We put that quote in, but the New York Times wanted to take it out, and I think fairly, because we couldn't back it up because we don't know. We just don't know. And a group this important that is having this much effect on all of your lives, folks, listen, only less than 1% of federal cases get to the Supreme Court. And there are many, many, many important cases that stop at the Court of Appeals. And those 40-year-old judges are going to be there for 40 years.
Okay, so listen, if you have a question for Eric and you are joining us live here on the video link, then you can raise your hand and ask a question. I know a lot of you have already written stuff in the chat, and I want to get to that as well. And I also think if you look over Eric's right shoulder, his left, our right, you could just barely make out the roof outside of the guest house.
No, you can't.
Yeah.
Liar, pants on fire.
Yeah. Also, there is a request to meet Sweeney. You are very insistent on sharing pictures of your dogs, which I understand to a certain extent why people share. You know, Tom and Leslie are here. They're constantly sharing pictures of their animals. I think it's a little more tasteful, and it's usually cats. But I feel like you do it a little bit. I mean, it is a lot of your dogs. So
yes, it is. And one of the reasons I do this, and that surprises me, is people ask for it. I'm not making that up. So like you, Pete, I just respond to the masses.
Yes, you want to meet the demand of the fans. Yes. Leslie and Tom seem like they've always been drinking at these Zooms. They are always having the most fun. And right now their camera is moving in to find animals. There's dog.
Can I say something personal for a second, Pete?
Yes, of course.
It's Carl.
It's Carl the dog right there.
You mentioned fans. So
yeah.
Pete, everybody knows Pete is one of the most green people out there, and it does so much for the
environmentally. You mean, right? Green people. What are we talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
And Pete used to come down to Atlanta. Has come down to Atlanta a few times at the behest of a local resort here to do environmental type things. And at one of those times, he came down and did a show. 3 years ago, I think.
That's right. Yeah.
And so, I of course, Lynn and I came to the show, and some of your listeners came, and a former student of mine came with a friend of his. So the friend wasn't a former student. And the student introduced me, and the friend said, "I'm one of your biggest fans." And I turned to Lynn and I said, that's only because of Pete. It's not something I ever thought in my life could ever be a thing ever. Like, I didn't know what to say. I was just, and that's just, I owe that to you.
Yeah, because constitutional law scholars don't usually have fans.
Right. Even my family aren't my fans, I mean, it's,
oh yeah. Well, neither are mine.
It was a moment though, Pete. I stepped away from it thinking, well, because I had told Lynn about Supreme Myths, why the Supreme Court is not a court.
Yeah.
I almost didn't write that book. Really. I was talking to Lynn about it and saying, if I write this book, no one is going to agree with me. And a lot of law professors think the Supreme Court decides cases based on values. Almost all political scientists think that.
Right. But
to the best of my knowledge, no one had ever made this point, that it's not even a court at all. It's really not. And I said to Lynn, this will get me some, pushback, and people may think I'm a nut. And Lynn said to me, what do you want out of this? Why, besides obviously the resume line, he wrote a book, that's good. What do you want out of this? And I thought about it, and I said, I just want this to be part of the conversation someday, because I really think I'm right.
Well, it's been a big part of our conversation for a long time. And I don't know if you are right.
I am right.
Fair enough. I can't challenge you. All right. Let's go to some questions from people that are joining us. We have 66 people, subscribers here. to the show. We're very happy to have Eric Segall here. And I see that Steve Fox has his hand up. And maybe I shouldn't be saying last names, but anyway, Steve.
I added it. That's my fault.
That's all right. There's a lot. I mean, if you Googled a guy named Steve Fox, you'd probably find thousands of people.
Exactly.
No one would know.
You get foxes.
I think there's 2 at my company.
There you go. All right, Steve. Hey, thank you for joining us. What do you want to ask or say?
You mentioned about Justin Walker, and I wasted an hour of my life last night researching him. And I'm just really disgusted with the process and the fact that the ABA changed the rating from not qualified to well qualified. And I think the not qualified was for the district court. The well qualified is for the appellate court. It's in a different circuit as well. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on about the ABA changing the rating. They said that it was because they have different criteria, which didn't really seem right to me because it's.
But just to clear it up, who is this guy Justin Walker, who Steve sadly wasted all this time on, but probably worth it for this question alone? Thanks, Steve.
So thanks, Steve. Justin Walker is a kid. He's 38, and he is not. This won't surprise anybody. He is McConnell's protege. He's from Kentucky.
He's a small boy from Kentucky.
Yeah, he's bad. He's bad news all the way down. He is a true believer, and in fact, you all might remember that a few weeks ago when the virus hit really hard and the Senate went out of session for the weekend, the reason for that was McConnell and Kavanaugh, Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, who Justin Walker clerked for, went to Kentucky for some ceremony involving Walker. So he was first nominated to be a trial judge. At the federal level, there are trial courts, appellate courts, and the Supreme Court, 3 levels. He went from Duke University to Yale Law School, maybe in Harvard, one of the two, to a clerkship, 2 clerkships, and then to become a legal writing teacher at the University of Louisville in Kentucky. He never practiced law a day in his life. He never saw a jury. He never saw a deposition. He never saw anything about practicing law. So when the Federalist Society got Trump to nominate him to be on the trial court, the American Bar Association said, this is crazy. The guy has never seen a courtroom other than being clerk. He's not qualified to judge in a courtroom, and believe me, he wasn't. So they rated him not qualified. But of course, because the Republicans, own the Senate, he got approved. Now, being a trial, there are 400 or 500 trial court judges. It's a big deal, but any legal issues, hard legal issues, abortion, same-sex marriage, whatever, it's not going to stop at a trial court. There's going to be the Court of Appeals above it. Then he was nominated to the Court of Appeals just a few months after being a district court judge, which is unheard of. It's almost unprecedented. And what the American Bar Association said was so wrong, Steve. They said, well, he wasn't qualified to be on the trial court, but he is qualified to be on the Court of Appeals because that's more legal research and writing. And I have a firsthand story of why that's wrong. My very close friend and former federal judge, Richard Posner, who some of you might know, who is undoubtedly the most famous federal judge in America, not to be on the Supreme Court.
The only reason I know him is because you work him into every conversation, calling him your friend.
He's a legend, Pete. He's a legend.
I'm just saying.
Although he had a lot of lawyering experience, and when he was put on the Court of Appeals in 1981 or something. But as time went on, he decided that being a Court of Appeals judge, he could not adequately review what trial courts did without himself doing trials. And Court of Appeals judges are allowed to go down the ladder to the trial court and do trials, which he did so he could understand it. The problem with Justin Walker that I see is he has no intellectual curiosity. He's an ideologue. And the fact that he's going to be on what people consider the second highest court in the land, the D.C. Court of Appeals, is really problematic. And Steve, you should be bothered. And I'm sorry you wasted an hour of your life.
One word to describe Mitch McConnell. Remember, this is being broadcast throughout the nation. It's not just these folks tonight. So don't hold back.
Disgusting.
Okay, let's go to my friend Kim in Iowa. Kim, you're on.
Kind of wondering about the temporary block of the full release of the Mueller report today. If you think that will hold, if that temporary block will hold, and what the effect of the temporary block is.
So this just happened at 4:00 today. So I'm not going to lie and say I'm an expert on all what's happening. What I understand is a congressional committee wants the unredacted Mueller report. God knows they should get it. The lower court said, yes, the Department of Justice has to turn it over. And like has happened 16 times during the Trump administration, 16, the Supreme Court stepped in and basically said, stop, we're going to put a stay on this. You're going to file briefs with us, and we'll tell you what to do. And I want to give you some numbers. The two George Bush administration, my friend Steve Vladeck at the University of Texas, shout out. You should all follow Steve Vladeck on Twitter and say, I told you to do that. Steve is an expert on these things. He's been keeping track. And if I have my numbers correctly, there were 16 total times between the two Bushes and the two Obamas. I mean, Bush's two and Obama's two, where the federal government asked the Supreme Court to step in preliminarily, like this case. In the Trump, they've done it 32 times.
Wow.
Already in 3 years. And they've won 16 of them. So this is a real problem, and this transcends the Supreme Court. This transcends everything, folks. Listen, the Mueller report was supposed to be for us, was supposed to be for the public. Now, a judge overseeing the redaction of the report will not allow classified information, and that's correct. When I was at the Department of Justice, it was my job to look at documents and do this kind of thing. So I know a lot about it. No one is saying that the public should see classified information. Nobody is saying the public should see national security sensitive information. But this is a committee of Congress, and they do have a right to see that stuff. And more importantly, much more importantly, we, the public, have the, I'm sorry I'm preaching here, but we have the right to see the unredacted parts of that report that don't contain classified information. And that's what the judges said. And the Roberts Court is not going to let it happen.
Is it true, Eric Segall, that you know things about Iran-Contra that you can never tell anybody?
Yes.
Is it true, John Oldie, that you are eating a Twizzler in front of everybody like you're a small child? Is that true? Yes.
I want a Twizzler. I love Twizzlers.
I mean,
this is very true. It's Twizzlers.
He's holding it in front of the camera and he's peeling it apart like a little tiny boy.
I got a problem with candy, Pete. Sorry.
Thank you. All right. Let's go to Steve.
Hey, so I have a question about ethics for nominees to the Supreme Court. There have been stories about Kavanaugh having a tremendous amount of debt. I don't know if they are true or not, but if they were true and now he has no debt, wouldn't that be a problem?
So I've actually looked into this a little bit because there are groups out there that don't understand. I think the debt was $200,000, Steve. I think. I'm not sure, but I think that's what they said. And then it was gone. And I've been following that trail a little bit. I'm sorry, but there's no way to know. It might be true. It may not be true. I have no evidence. There's a bigger issue that you raised that I'd like to talk about, though. Every federal judge in the United States is bound by an ethics code involving gifts and travel and that kind of thing, except the 9 justices who aren't really judges on the United States Supreme Court. They have no binding ethics code. So this won't surprise you, but both Justice Thomas and Justice Scalia on several occasions went to Koch brothers retreats in California. When Justice Scalia died, and Pete knows if we start talking about Justice Scalia, I will get more emotional than I should. But when he died, he was on an all-expense-paid trip by a dark money right-wing religious group. So I've written articles on this, and an organization called Fix the Court. You should all follow Fix the Court. It's a great group. They are great on this issue. And they have put legislation in front of Congress requiring the Supreme Court to follow an ethics code. Think about it. The highest court in the land, or the highest non-court court in the land, is not bound by any ethics code. It's insane.
Great question, Steve. Let me go to Ben A. You're on, and there's been a lot of things that you said in the last 3 minutes that are causing me to want to have a drink. This is my first drink of the evening. I'm lying. It's my third. But thank you very much to Zach Lewis for buying me this bottle of whiskey, because I complained that I was drinking crappy whiskey. And thank you, Zach, who's joining us tonight, for helping me get this. All right. It's Michter's, by the way, is what I'm drinking. I guess that's good. Ben, are you there?
Hey, yeah, I'm here.
All right, buddy.
All right, so 2 questions, if I might. One, is there any way that the hopefully next president can unscrew the judiciary? And 2, and this is my just crazy idea to sort of unpoliticize the judges. What if the minority party nominated judges instead? It would force them to pick more moderate choices.
Thanks, Ben. Those are really, really good questions.
How do we get unscrewed?
So, Pete, this could be a whole show. This could be an hour segment on this.
Well, I've got a lot more questions, so come on, be concise.
After Justice, so the first answer to your question is Democrats will likely, if they get the Senate and the president, do something. Now, what that something is going to be very controversial if they get both, the presidency and the Senate. I'm in favor of adding 1 seat because they stole a seat. Garland should be on the Supreme Court, full stop. So I'm in favor of making the Supreme Court 10. Now, once we do that, we'd have 5 Democrats, 5 liberals, and 5 Republicans, 5 conservatives. And my idea after Justice Scalia died, when everybody thought that Hillary was going to win and the Supreme Court would be liberal forever, I said, no, don't do that. We don't want a liberal Supreme Court. We don't want a conservative Supreme Court. We want a much less powerful Supreme Court so that people can decide most issues. The way to do that, and Ben, your second idea is very close to my proposal, is there always has to be 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats. If we have an independent who wants to be on the Supreme Court, I had a fix for that. My proposal was actually very appealing to some high-placed Republicans because they thought Hillary was going to win and they were going to lose the court.
Yeah.
My friends, my progressive Democrat friends, threw me out. In fact, I don't mind saying this, the American Constitution Society, of whom I'm a board member, their slogan was something like, we need 9. My slogan was 8 is great. And they kind of didn't let me use their forum to express my idea. American history tells us that when the Supreme Court goes too far in either direction, there'll be a strong backlash. We don't want that. What I personally want, Ben, is a weaker Supreme Court, and I do want a more liberal Supreme Court, but mostly I want it weaker.
Great question, Ben. And Eric, you're so good at this. I am really actually, as always, paying attention to you when you talk. Really important question from longtime listener. The great thing about a radio show that is on every day for years is that there's a lot of inside jokes. If you listen to any long running radio show, there's references and things. And Jeff asks on the chat something sure to upset me and to make Eric happy. The question is Sarah Palin Trigg's mother? Which takes us back to a conspiracy theory that Segall. I told him, don't follow through with this conspiracy theory on the record because it'll destroy your reputation. It's insanely stupid. But he stands by it. Let's move on, shall we? I don't even want. Nobody wants to hear your answer to that question. Sarah Palin, how far she's fallen. Okay, Kevin and Mary, you are on with Eric Segall.
Hi, Pete. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Kevin. Mary.
This is Mary. She's an OBGYN. So we're going to ask about Russo. This is the case that the non-court heard in March about having admitting privileges. This is the Louisiana case. And I guess we're curious how far exactly the Supreme Court has leverage to go here? Is it just about upholding this one law? We're up in Philly. Does this have any impact on reproductive rights in other parts of the country? Could they wholesale get 5 judges to knock out Roe in one fell swoop?
Maybe we should ask Mary, your doctor wife, is it, the question about the admitting privileges situation, because Eric, you always refer to it shorthand as admitting privileges. And I think it's really important to always remind people what this is about, which is to make abortions harder to get by creating regulations that no doctor thinks are reasonable or necessary. Do I have that right, doctor?
Yeah, totally agreed. It's ridiculous. Other outpatient surgery, you don't hear cases being brought that, a urologist needs admitting privileges after doing their, cystoscope in the surgery center. So yeah, it's completely ridiculous.
Yeah, when I got my vasectomy, yes, I did.
What?
There was no. You could argue that
Talk
would
about
be.
Sarah Palin, please.
Are you still here, Segall? They're saying, and the admitted privileges were something like the width of the hallway or something like that. No doctor in the country, no OB-GYN at least expert or anybody is asking for this. Segall, take it away. Unless you want to handle this, Dan McDonald. Do you just trying to see if you're on your toes, buddy?
So Pete and I did a podcast with a guy named Mike Dorff, who I blog with. Mike was Justice Kennedy's law clerk when the big case, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, was decided, because we have different views of what should happen. What we want to happen. But first, on the admitting privileges law, I'm going to do it again, Pete. Don't cut me off. My friend Judge Posner, when he was a judge, had this case.
Drink, Posner.
Had this case. Now, anybody who knows Richard Posner knows he is all about data. He's all about facts. And in fact, he's criticized for that because he doesn't care about history and stuff. He cares about facts. And I knew him when he researched this case. And then he wrote an opinion striking down the exact same law in Indiana or Wisconsin, or both, I forget which, because these laws are given to state legislatures by organizations. People don't know that. 24 or 25 states have these laws because they're canned and they're given, and the Republicans vote for them. Anyway, Posner wrote an amazing opinion, which Justice Breyer borrowed from at length when he also struck down the law for the Supreme Court, showing that the admitting privileges law has zero medical benefits and just makes abortions harder. And then he listed all of the procedures that don't require admitting privileges that are much more dangerous than abortion.
Right.
So that's that. Now, so I'm going to say something that may get me thrown off the show, but I hope the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade and Casey this term. I am pro-choice all the way down. I met my fantastic wife, or we kind of met, when I was giving a talk to Planned Parenthood. Lynn was board chair of the Atlanta chapter. I have donated my time to Planned Parenthood. I am pro-choice all the way down.
And you've been a really important role model for me in terms of how to think about raising daughters and being a better husband. You are as feminist of a guy as I know, and you've been a great role model for me. So go ahead. There's your bona fides. There's your credibility. Go ahead now with your insane point about overturning Roe v. Wade.
It's going to happen, people. So we know there are 4 votes. Now, when I say we don't know that like we know 2 and 2 is 4, but we know it. There are 4 votes: Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas. The only issue is Justice Roberts. Justice Roberts' wife is part of an organization and was once the chair of the organization called Feminists for Life. That's not Feminists for Life. It's Feminists for Life.
Yeah, we know. We have a number of members that are joining us tonight.
He's a devout Catholic. He is going to vote to overturn Roe and Casey.
So you predict.
The only question is when. Now, listen, in the last election, 1 of 5 voters said the Supreme Court was the most important issue to them. And of that 20%, 56% voted for Donald Trump, which is a huge number given Hillary won the election, 50.5 to 49.5 or whatever. If we take abortion, so we're going to lose Roe and Casey. We're going to lose those cases. That's a hard thing to accept, but it's going to happen. The only question is, does it happen before this election or after this election? If it happens before the election, I honestly believe Trump would lose. Now, Justice Roberts knows that too. So the question is, does Roberts want Trump reelected? And don't think he doesn't. No, go ahead.
Well, to be clear, this is political analysis, not legal analysis. And basically what you're saying is that this abortion is such an animating issue. Kim's daughter's too beautiful to even continue. And it's such an animating issue that if it's overturned, it animates the pro-choice people and motivates them. And also, just to be clear, if they do overturn Roe v. Wade, it means it turns it back to the states, which means the Democratic, the blue states will still allow abortion. And I don't know where you guys live. Is it Kevin and Mary?
We're in Philadelphia,
yeah. I don't know what Pennsylvania would do. It'd be a close call. Pete, let me just say that in 1970, 3 years before Roe, where it was only legal in California and it was kind of legal in New York. Rich women, of course, always got safe abortions. Upper middle class women pretty much got safe abortions. Middle class women struggled. And of course, poor women had a really, really hard time getting abortions, especially if they didn't live in the cities. That story is substantially true today. If you are a woman in Montana or rural Georgia or Mississippi and you don't have money, it is going to be very, very difficult for you to get an abortion. And I make that point because the question is, and this is where liberals and progressives leave me in the dust. I mean, they hate when I say this. Some agree. Roe and Casey did more to hurt every progressive cause ever other than abortion than any Supreme Court case except that one slavery case years ago. So we do lose something if they're overturned, but we don't lose as much as you think because it's still going to be legal in New York and California and Illinois and places like that. So again, I ask you, if we take abortion out of the election, there'll still be guns and there'll still be gay rights. But those issues don't animate and raise money for the Republican Party as much as abortion.
Well, real quick, Bill Boyle, are you still with us? Do you want to weigh in on the political analysis?
No, I'm still here, Pete.
What do you think about what he just said about overturning Roe v. Wade, what that means for the election? Any thoughts?
I think he's totally right. I mean,
I love Bill.
It's the animating spirit of all the evangelical vote. I mean, it's once you take abortion off the table, then it matters on sort of a state level, but nationally, it doesn't do anything for them. So,
Bill,
yeah,
I want to say
absolutely right.
I want to be very.
Wade was also weirdly decided, as Eric can say far better than I can. And it kind of gives room for people, some reasonable room to argue against it. I know some folks in the Federalist Society, and I've had these arguments. And so, yeah, on the politics, he's 100% right. It's definitely going to get overturned, and it's a disaster for the GOP when it does.
Dr. Mary, anything else you would add, since we've got the honor of you joining us to what he said and to Eric's predictions in terms of what it means for women's reproductive rights and health care?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I do see in the chat someone is talking about like chemical abortion and how that will remain an option as that can be mailed to people. That is only up to a certain gestational age at which many women may not even realize they're pregnant or have made a choice about what they want to do with the pregnancy. So that's certainly not a good solution.
And Pete, thank you, Mary. That's really right. Although there will be a problem with unsafe abortions, but nowhere near as bad as it was in the 60s, but still a problem. Pete, I don't want to be cavalier about this. So my dad is still here. He is a great poker player, really. And he knows, all good poker players know, that playing bad hands is almost as important as playing good hands. I hate this hand about abortion. I favor a constitutional amendment enshrining a woman's right to choose. But we have a terrible, what Mike Dorf gets wrong, and I'll defend this with him, we're good friends, is he's not willing to accept the bad hand. Well, if you don't understand the difference between good hands and bad hands in poker, you're going to lose. And here in politics, I think it's the same.
All right, let me go to Jennifer, who has had her hand up. Jennifer, you're on the air with Professor Eric Segall. You there?
Hi, Pete. Hi, Eric.
Hey,
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us.
I'm curious about what their end game really is by stacking the courts. I noticed that there's a lot of progressive things that go through. We have gay marriage. People are still fighting for Roe. So even though there's actual progress in our society as liberals, and they keep stacking the courts, what's their real end game?
Yeah. So the 3 days, I think it was, after the election, I wrote a blog post where I said, what is the Supreme Court going to look like under Trump if he gets picks and all that? And their number one, the Federalist Society has a lot of agendas. Now, there is division among the rank and file. Don't get me wrong. I have so many friends in the Federalist Society who are thoughtful, well-meaning people for whom we go out and drink and reasonably disagree, including judges. So that I know. So don't get me wrong about that. It's the leadership that's the problem, and their agenda number one is deregulation, much more than abortion. The leadership of the Federalist Society wants regulations gone, and that's why Gorsuch and Kavanaugh are on the court. Because there are a lot of other conservatives out there who are much more moralistic, who have been much more open about their abortion stuff, but they are both deregulatory. And by the way, that's not a criticism of Trump. All presidents pick Supreme Court justices for whom they think they will push their agendas. George Bush, after 9/11, his biggest agenda for the Supreme Court was getting judges about executive power, who would approve of executive power. I think Barack Obama just wanted solid, moderate Supreme Court justice, and he wanted a Latina. So he got Sonia Sotomayor. What they want is deregulation, first and simple, because that serves the interests of their economic supporters, like the Koch brothers.
Yeah.
Second, there's a huge, and this is what scares me the most, there's a huge religious component to this. And they absolutely want to minimize gay rights. I think they know that the Supreme Court will never overturn the same-sex marriage cases, because how do you untie that knot is just unconscionably hard, although it's possible. But they want to limit gay rights, and they want to maximize the ability of churches. There was a big case last week, about a private religious school that fired 2 different cases. One involved a disabled person, one involved an elderly person. They violated federal law by firing these people. And the school's argument was, you can't touch us because we're religious. It's complicated stuff, but those cases are in the pipeline. The Masterpiece Cake Shop case, you all remember, about not serving gay same-sex marriages. Those cases are in the pipeline. And they want religion to take a primary role in American constitutional law. Yeah. That's their second agenda, and it's a big one.
All right. That means we have to drink.
Second Amendment too, Pete. They are big on the Second Amendment, but not as big as they are on the other 2 things.
Let's go to, we'll do a few more here. You good, Eric? How's your energy? You feeling good? All right.
Yeah, I'm good.
I see dogs. I see children in the background. Let's go to the Chum Man, and let's try to everybody, obviously keep him. We can get as many people as we can. Chum and his newborn child. Hey, buddy.
Hey, this is Everly. She's 4, but I'm switching them around. Professor Segall, thank you so much for being on tonight, and awesome to learn from you as always.
Thank you.
Question is, what is our maybe ground up solution here? Is it, do we rename the Supreme Court the plain cheese court, or what do we do as like to not be smashed by this train that's coming?
Yeah. So again, that is a little bit more of a political question and reading what the American public will accept. But make no mistake, Congress and the president have injured the Supreme Court on a number of occasions. For example, if you want to talk about originalism, which I've written a book about, in 1800, when Thomas Jefferson beat John Adams and Aaron Burr and became president, he convinced the Congress to turn off the candles at the Supreme Court and take away their money. They couldn't meet for a year, for example. In the 1850s and 60s, the Congress played with the number of Supreme Court justices. It began at 6, then it went to, I think, 8, and then it was 10, then it was 9, and that was all politically motivated. The most famous thing, of course, is FDR's threat to pack the courts when the court was striking down New Deal programs. So there are many ways to make the Supreme Court weaker. The Supreme Court, the judges have to be a judge for life. No question. I don't think they have to be a Supreme Court justice for life. So on Twitter today, there was a conversation with some very eminent law professors, Dan Epps, who some of you might read Garrett Epps in The Atlantic. He's Garrett's son. Dan Epps has a proposal in the Yale Law Review that Mayor Pete, I think it was, adopted of shuffling around the justices. What we could say is you sit on the Supreme Court for 10 years, and then you go down and be a Court of Appeals judge. Now, that would be challenged, but I think it's constitutional. The problem is, of course, Trump is also stacking the Court of Appeals. And what you're asking is a question a little beyond my pay grade, but my answer is, if the Democrats get the Senate and the presidency, there is a long tradition of cutting back the Supreme Court's power, and that's what they should do.
Derek, who's joining us, longtime listener, said he was a student of Garrett Epps Law School.
Yeah.
That's cool. Small world. Let's go to Karen Madison, the legend. Karen Madison, you are on with Eric Segall.
I'm so depressed right now.
You're not alone.
I know. I hate being the messenger. I
I know. And I was just like going to say, I was so excited because you tweet me. And part of me, like half of this is just all new to me, but it just sounds like there's so many, this court's deregulating things. And for me, there's so many protections that are being lifted. And I feel so frightened.
Well, let me just say, and no one is a bigger critic of the Supreme Court than I am, that's not first and foremost the Supreme Court's fault in one sense. It is Trump who basically turned the Environmental Protection Agency to the Environmental Destruction Agency. Yeah. They're doing most of it. But what this Supreme Court is doing is when companies challenge regulations on them, they are being much more aggressive in saying that administrative agencies, can't do this or can't do that. But let me just say, at this moment in time, there's still a lot of deference by the court to administrative agencies. The fear is that's going to change dramatically, and it might.
Right, but there's other rights that are tucked into some of these other laws for transgender, for people of color, and all of these things. Like, it just feels like, how can we reverse these problems?
I'll tell you how. I have the answer. I have the answer. We have to vote Trump out. We have to vote the Republicans in the Senate out. We have to have both houses of Congress and the presidency. And then a lot of things will get a lot better.
Or we could move to New Zealand or Canada. I think that's another potential solution. Bob, you are up. Thanks, Karen. I like that shirt.
Thanks, Pete.
Hey,
Eric, I'm from Missouri, and here we have an issue with, it's a very red state, as you know. But when you put in people's initiatives on the ballot, like redistricting with a nonpartisan demographer, or lobbying reforms, or those type of things, raising the wage, they always pass. They pass by 60 or some percent. But when people vote for the legislature, which is heavily Republican, there are two issues that matter to them. One is guns, and the other is abortion. Now, we have a Wild West attitude towards guns here, but they still run with the idea that if you put those Democrats in, they will put rules on your
So then
on your guns.
Let me cut to the chase.
Why won't then they run on the idea that if you put those Democrats in, they'll make abortion illegal again? What's your argument there?
So I have been attacked by progressives on Twitter for this, but I have the answer for that, and I think it's obvious. What Joe Biden needs to say, and by the way, this is what he should say. He needs to say it and he should say it. When they ask him about Supreme Court justices in the debates or whenever, his answer needs to be, I am going to appoint moderate, responsible, excellent lawyers or judges to the Supreme Court. And if they ask about abortion and guns, he should say, look, I'm going to appoint them. They're the experts, and I have no litmus tests. My litmus test is quality. It's quality. It's not agenda. Now, the thing about Joe Biden, the only good thing, I think, about Joe Biden is He has
his age.
He has the background to make those statements. If it wasn't for Joe Biden, Clarence Thomas wouldn't be on the Supreme Court of the United States. People know that he has not been strong on judges. Obama and Biden were not strong on judges. It wasn't a big agenda item for them. So in this election, he needs to say remember, Hillary said, I will only put judges on the court who would overturn Citizens United, which is really dumb. And I'll only put judges who would support Roe versus Wade. Don't say any of that. Don't say it. What Biden should say is, I want excellent lawyers who will be great judges who will follow the law, period.
Whether he says it or not, why can't that be used still by the Republicans to scare people into saying, even though he's not talking about it, this is what he's going to do? I guess I'm saying I don't see it taking away as much of the argument.
Well, for one thing, wait a second. Well, you're right, but all we can do is our best. But for one thing, here's something Biden could say. I spent many, many years as the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And if you look at my record, you will see how many conservative Republican judges got through.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
that's the best we can do. I mean, it's a losing issue. The reason I want abortion off the agenda is because it's a losing issue.
All right. Well, it's been about an hour, pal. And I think we've taken a ton of questions here. I'm looking at Karen Madison right now, and you are good at, my friend, you're good at embodying the anguish of many of us. Your face can't hide it. So I would like to start a chant for Karen Madison that I'm going to unmute everybody and just follow along. And not only is this for Karen, this is for everybody. It's just Karen Madison. Karen Madison. Feels good. Feels good. All right. That's awesome. Eric Segall, what a wonderful pleasure it has been to host you. I think I've even muted you. Let me get off our guest of honor here. Everybody should follow him. If you're not on Twitter, create a Twitter account just to follow him. Get his books, and I'm sure he will be joining us again. Eric, closing remarks. Francis is now eating a child's type of ice cream on a stick. Everything about her is very childish in terms of eating.
This has been a total joy.
Yes.
Thank you, Eric.
This has been a total joy for me to put people's faces with their Twitter accounts. And as usual, you let me do the talking. And that's just awesome.
Well, now it lets me do the drinking. You know, I don't have to work for the corporate overlords anymore. And you are the easiest guest in the world to interview because you do take it so well and so far. So thank you very much, buddy. And thank all of you for joining me tonight. This was awesome. This is my new favorite song, at least for now. It puts me in a good mood every time. Can you hear it? Every time. If you don't like this song, you can. Everybody, hands up. The world is crazy. That was a scary hour.
Go get the fireball, Eric.
That's what I'm doing.
Good night, everybody. I love all of you. I love you. You make me feel so good. Namaste. Good night, David. Good night, Derek. Good night, Kevin and Mary. Later, Drew. Later, Bob. Good night, Noble Plies. Ronnie in California. Good night, Steve. The legend that is Tina Winsett. You are the greatest woman I know. Oh, Joby in California. Doug Hummel. Long time, buddy. We've been together. Great Joe Liotta texting me weird shit during the chat. Jeff Hodder and his baby. Ben Walter, everybody. Vicky putting the camera on. Hey, Vicky! Good night, Cindy. Good night, Brady. Rod, still on the road. My new friend, Zach Lewis. Good night, Zach. Dr. Hummel. Okay, that's it from the Eric Segall live chat. Thank you to all of you who were in on the live chat. And if you want to join us for those and ask a question to one of the experts that joined the program, sign up with a paid subscription at patreon.com/Pete Dominick. Go to PeteDominick.com or just go to the show notes On every episode, there is a link to paid subscriptions. So glad to have you. Almost to 600. We got to get there this week. Can we do it? I think we can. All right. Finally for you, my appearance on MSNBC. From this past Sunday night, my old friend Dean Obeidallah and I were invited on with the great Joshua Johnson, and we had a great conversation about the divisive nature of mask wearing. We talked about the president golfing, and Joshua asked me how Americans should celebrate Memorial Day. I think I had a pretty good answer, if I do say so myself. Wait for the end for that. Also, I think I sounded pretty poised for a guy who just spent 2 hours in the emergency room with his daughter. Luckily, she's all right. I came home, and I did the MSNBC hit, and, well, here it is right now.
We're all in this together. That phrase gets thrown around a lot, but these days it is 100% true. Your willingness to wear a mask protects me from coronavirus if you are carrying the virus without symptoms. You don't wear a mask for yourself. You wear it for everyone else. And if you don't wear one, then you could be the person to get someone else infected without knowing it. You could literally cost someone their life. On Memorial Day, we honor those who died to protect us. But now, will we protect each other from death? And if you won't, what's your excuse? Joining us to discuss it is Pete Dominick, comedian and host of the podcast Stand Up with Pete Dominick, and Dean Obeidallah, columnist for The Daily Beast and the host of the Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM. Gentlemen, good to see you this evening. And Dean, let me start with you. We have nearly 100,000 coronavirus deaths. We also have people going to the beach, ignoring the CDC recommendations. Where's the disconnect?
Well, look, people want to get outside. I understand that. I really hope they, like you were saying, Joshua, the idea of being responsible, the idea of wearing a mask to protect others, even social distancing for others. I don't know why people don't want to wear a mask. I wore a mask. My mom saw a picture. She thought I became a doctor. It was a very exciting day for my mom. So for just the idea of making your mom happy, it's not a bad idea. Finally become a doctor. But, you know, Joshua, you mentioned that Donald Trump is not wearing a mask. And he's doing that to signal to his base, don't wear a mask, it's okay. Thankfully, you have other Republican governors like Mike DeWine in Ohio today saying wear a mask, the governor of North Dakota. So Donald Trump is peeling away little by little, I think, from other members of the GOP. It's about Trump and Trumpism. Care about our fellow Americans, care about people in this country, care about loved ones you haven't met. And I wish Donald Trump would get on board with that message. Instead, with Trump, it's just what's good for Trump and selfishness.
Yeah, we did hear from Mike DeWine today on Meet the Press, and North Dakota's governor, Doug Burgum, who is a Republican, made a very impassioned plea about what other people might be dealing with, the good reasons to wear a mask. Pete, let's dig into this thing about the president playing golf. He's been getting criticism for golfing on this holiday weekend. He was at his course in Virginia. Now, no president works all the time, even during national crises. Abraham Lincoln spent every summer during the Civil War at what is now known as the Soldiers' Home National Monument. FDR came up with the idea for the land lease program in World War II while he was on a fishing trip. Is this golfing trip a big deal in the bigger scheme of things?
Joshua, I'm hearing in my earpiece, FDR and Abraham Lincoln's people are asking that you not have their names leave your mouth in conclusion with Donald Trump's, because they are vastly different presidents who handled so many difficult things.
I have doubts that you are in direct contact with them, sir. I'm just skeptical. Call me crazy.
Excuse me, believe me, I'm in contact. A lot of people didn't know that these two presidents were two of the most celebrated presidents of all time. This president, of course, the difference between FDR and Abraham Lincoln and every other president was that they actually cared about the American people and the American public. This president, of course, criticized President Obama when he went golfing when there were two people that had died of Ebola in the United States of America. This president has spent $134 million in taxpayers' money. 250 times he has gone golfing because he truly doesn't care. Joshua, he's not concerned about the American people. He's only concerned about the numbers and when they go up. That's why he doesn't want us, as he said this week, taking any more tests. He said when there's more tests, there's more numbers. But of course, he has no idea about arithmetic.
Dean, we heard from a number of governors, as you mentioned, in Ohio and North Dakota. We've heard it from Andrew Cuomo here in New York about wearing masks, about how that should transcend politics. Unfortunately, it does not transcend privilege. There are some parts of the country, some groups of people, some demographics who are disproportionately affected by COVID-19. I would hope that would give us more reason to unify around covering our faces to protect as many of our fellow Americans as possible. But how do you see it?
First of all, FDR's and Lincoln's people just asked me to ask Pete not to mention them again, so I think it's kind of important to bring that up.
Fair enough.
How is it that you two have a connection to the presidential beyond that I don't have? How did that happen?
Actually, your audience is now telling me they have always wanted Dean Obeidallah to wear a mask, even long before this. But finish, Dean.
See, now, go ahead, Dean.
Thank you, Pete. Here's the reality. We are seeing really the underlying disparity in our society on steroids right now. And you see with the Black community, the Latino community, the Native American community, the way they're disproportionately affected by COVID-19. The death rate could be now, they say, 3 to 1 African American to white in this country, similar numbers for Hispanic and Native Americans. And that goes to long simmering problems in our society of institutional racism, from access to housing, to access to healthcare, to jobs that give you healthcare, to working on jobs that are essential services, making you go out there because it's either lose your house, lose your apartment, or work and risk your life. We're seeing it in my community. I'm Muslim, with Somali Muslims who work in meatpacking factories. Look, it's a challenging thing to solve, but now we are seeing it firsthand. And I hope going forward, I hope Joe Biden brings it up, frankly, about trying to address this disproportionate impact on people of color in our country during COVID-19, because it's much deeper than this. This is a symptom of a much more fundamental problem in our society.
Pete, before we have to go, tomorrow's Memorial Day. Tell me what you would like to see people do to honor the nearly 100,000 people, to memorialize those who have died of COVID-19. Pete, what would you like to see?
I think that's a great question. I think that people should wear a mask and be careful. When you think about the number of veterans that are actually older and who are more vulnerable as a result, we still have some World War II era veterans, the Vietnam era veterans as well are more vulnerable. The best thing we can do is to stay at home, to socially distance, to wear a mask. And now the veterans of this era, and a lot of combat veterans will tell you this, are the healthcare workers, those on the front lines, those working in grocery stores. So we need to honor those folks who are putting their own lives on the line. And we can do that right now by just being more responsible, more safe, wearing a mask and socially distancing, and doing whatever you can to honor those people while they're working right now, so we don't have more memorials like we saw on the front page of the New York Times today.
Pete Dominick and Dean Obeidallah, gentlemen, I appreciate you being with us. Thank you. And next time, hopefully you can come out of your shells a little bit more. There's no need to be shy. You can just...
Thanks, Joshua. We'll try.
We go back a long way, Dean and I, Josh. Thanks for having us.
I couldn't tell. It didn't show, but I appreciate you guys being with us. Thanks very much.
How about that? Funny? Poignant? We were in and out. It was good. Good stuff. Enlightening, entertaining, infotainment. Hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Stand Up. Thank you for your support with your paid subscription. Thank you for joining me on the live chat. And thank you for all of the amazing feedback lately. A whole bunch of new subscribers over the 3-day weekend, which was awesome. And I hope that we can get to 600. I think we're like 584. By the end of the week. That's my goal. So tell your friends, maybe you can sign somebody up and they can learn along with us each and every day. I continue to reach out to new subscribers and talk to people who've been listening to the show for years that I've never talked to. If I haven't connected with you yet, I hope to soon, because it's the lifeblood of the show and really inspiring for me to connect with folks. I talked to Jeff Myers on Friday morning for the first time. It was his birthday. His wife's asked me to call him up and wish him a happy birthday. We had a great talk. Really cool guy. Father, husband, lives in New Jersey and is an engineer, and amongst so many other great subscribers. So I hope to hear from you, and I will talk to you tomorrow right here on Stand Up Podcast.